Right, so let's actually continue building out the application. So what I'll do is I'll create a folder, I'll call it components. As a matter of fact, I'll move app.js to components folder because app is a component as well. So I'll have to change, and it should be components with an S. But once I change it, this is going to work still. Okay, so what I'll do next is I'll create another folder, I'll call it writers. So in writers, I'll create index.js. This will be a component as well, so let's import React from React. And for now, I'm just going to keep it as a functional component. So I'll export default, some props, and this will be a function. And let me wrap it with a fragment. And once we do that, we also need to import the fragment from React. So now that we have a fragment here, I'd like to also have a list of writers. So as I said back in app.js, what we do here is we basically have sort of like a navigation bar at the top where we can navigate between home as well as writers, but we'll also have another section below. So we'll just put an HR tag. This will be a horizontal line. And inside of that list, I'd like to actually map through the writers. So I'll do writers map to writer, and then we'll return a list item which will also contain a link to the writer details page. But for now, let's just keep it as an empty string. And then let's close the tag. Inside of it is where we'll basically put some of the other information. This would be typically the name of the writer. So let's save it like that for now. Of course, this will break because we need to import the writers. So let's pass the writers because we do need to pass them as props. I'll expect them to be provided as the props. Let me go back to app.js, and at this point I'll import writers from writers like that. And then the one thing we could do is we can switch from a render to component. So we could have the component property, and this will reference the writers component that we actually just imported at the top. As a matter of fact, if I go back, it looks like I made a typo here, it should be writers. And then finally, the link component is of course missing, so we need to import it, and it's going to be a named import from React router down like that. If I say that, there should be no issues for now. But then of course, if you click on writers, this is not going to work because we don't provide the writers property, which we do expect in the writers component. So the component property is perfectly fine as long as you don't need to pass any properties to that component. But in this case, we do have to provide some properties. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to switch back to render. Okay. And I'm going to provide a callback function that will expect the properties. But then we'll basically just render the writers component like that. We will expand the properties that are being provided, 3 dots. And then finally, I'll also provide writers as the additional or extra property. So let me provide that, and let's also indent this for better readability. And then of course we need to extract them from the state. So let's destructure them from the state like that, and it should give us the list of writers. So now I can go back to writers. Instead of the name, I can actually provide the name of the writer. So let's actually extract that from the writer object itself. So we'll have the ID, we'll have the name. I'll include the name as part of the link. And then for the key on the list item, this will actually be the ID of the writer. Now back in here, if you go back to app.js, there's actually a reason that I did include the properties like that. If we go to writers and if we do console log of the properties, let me actually switch back to props here. Let's actually just console log them out. And then this will need to change to props writers for the time being. So let me go back and let me go to console. So as you can see here, we get an output that contains the properties for the writers component. But besides the writers themselves, which is the property that we pass in app.js over here, right, the writers, this is basically the list of the writers that we set when the component mounts. Besides those writers, we also get a bunch of other properties such as history, location, and match. And if you go to match, you'll actually find the URL, which is /writers. So I'd like to extract that URL, and I'd like to actually include it as part of the path on the link object. So we'll bring it back to writers, as we had before. And then I'll also have the match, but then I don't need the whole match object. I just need the URL itself. And then the URL will actually be included as part of the link itself. So I'll use template strings here. So let's include the URL like that. It'll have slash. So we do need to include the ID of the writer. So I'll do ID like that. And let's save that. And if we go back to the browser, hopefully there's no errors. So when I click, let's say an Osho, it's going to append /Osho to the end of the URL. And that's the same thing is basically going to happen for every other writer, as you might expect. Now with this setup, we can actually add another route component like that. And this route component will match the writers. So we'll actually include the URL itself as before. So let me put template strings. I'll include the $ with the curly braces like that. And then here we will match the writer ID like that. So this writer ID will be something like Joseph Campbell or Osho, whatever. This is basically going to be lowercase version of the name of the writer. Okay. So once that path is being matched, I'd like to render another component. So I'll put a render function, and we'll actually have another component. I'll call it writer for now like that. And at this point we do need to create it. So inside of writers, let me create another folder, writer. Let me create another file. I'll call it index.js like that. And we'll just do import React from React. Okay. We'll do export default of a function that expects props, and that returns a fragment, and inside of that fragment we'll probably have the name. Well, let's also have the ID of the author. Let's say we'll have a name, we'll have description, we'll have the image, and some of the other stuff. I'll just keep it that way for now. Maybe I'll just wrap this inside of the div, because I'm not sure if we can actually include the text nodes like that. Just for safety, I'll just include them nested inside of a div. So let me save that. And the other one is where we actually need to import the writer from the writer file like that. And then finally we are missing the route component from React Router. And then in writer, I think I forgot to include the fragment component as well. So let me include that component also, so we don't get any errors. And then back in here, if I click on the name of the writer, as you can see here, we do get the div below, but we don't actually get the information about the writer. And that's normal and natural, and that's because we just simply hard-coded all that information. What I would like to do though is, for my properties, I would actually like to get the information about that author. So I'd like to get the ID, the name, the description, and all the other properties as well. So what we can do inside of this render function is, first of all, we'll get some of the properties. So I do want to keep them because we'll have information like location, history, all that good stuff. So I'd like to keep them still. So I will spread them out to the writer component like that. And then I will also spread some of the other information. Now, because we do have the writers object, what we can do is we can pass the ID. Now, in fact, we do have the ID as the parameter. In fact, let me just slow down for a second. I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back to the writer. So what we'll do is, let's do console log. Let's have the match property from the props. Let me just console log that prop. Do that. Let's go back. And as you can see here, let's say I click on Nietzsche. When that happens, as you can see here, we get some of the information regarding the matched URL. So we get the URL itself, we also get the path, and we get the params that contains the ID of the author. So at this point, once we get the ID, we might convert this component to a class component. Then we might have component did mount, and then we might actually make a request to the server to fetch that author, given that we do have a valid ID of that author. But the thing is, we already have the writers inside of our state, and then we actually do have them inside of a writers component. So the one thing you could do is you could actually find the writer, because we do have the ID at this point, right? The ID is contained within the props. So let's do the following here. I'm actually going to spread something, but what I'm going to spread is I'm actually going to call writers find. So this will give us some writer, okay. And then we'll check if that writer's ID matches props match params ID, which is basically the property that you would see in the browser once you expand the match object. So if you go to match params writer ID, that's the ID that we are interested in. And this is how we'll be able to match it. Now, in fact, instead of props, we can actually destructure it a little bit. So we'll destructure the match. We can kill the props. And let's try to save that. And let's also go back to the writer. And let's actually put the ID here. Let's put the name. Let's have the description. So at this point, this should be dynamic. And then finally, the image. I'll put image like that. This should be the URL to the image. Oops. That. And then image also needs to be extracted from the props. So back in the browser, we get props is not defined. I think I know what's going on. We forgot to remove the props over here. And of course, you could keep them if you'd like to have access to things like history or location. But for now, I don't need them. I just need the match itself. So I'll keep it like that. We'll just have the information about the writer. And in fact, what I'm doing here is I'm basically extracting the information of the writer. So that would be like ID, name, description, all that stuff. And I'm basically spreading it out on the writer so that we'll get that information in the writer object itself. So we don't have to do something like props, writer, and then ID, right? We can just simply extract those from the props directly. And one last typo I did is instead of ID, we need to actually have writer ID because that's the name of the parameter that we do pass inside of the router. So once you do save that, and you can click around on different authors here and you're going to see the information about them. Of course, we need to change that a little bit. So let's actually have, let me remove the div. I don't want to have any divs anymore. So we'll make this an h1 tag, okay? And I'll include the name inside of it. We'll disregard the ID for now. Then instead of a paragraph, I'd like to have the description, like that. And then also just below it, we might have an h3 tag, for example, where we might also include the information as to when the author was born as well as deceased, if that's the case. So let's include those two props, and then I'll have them just next to one another like that. And then in between, what I'll do is the m dash, which will create a dash in between like that. And then finally for the image, let's include the image at the very top. So I'll have the image tag like that. The source will be the image itself, so cut and paste it, and let's delete all those other lines. Let's save that. And then finally for the alt tag, we can just simply include the name of the author like that. So this should look much better now. Let's go back, and the only thing is on the image, I'll go ahead and add a style tag. This will be an object. We'll say max width needs to be, let's say 300 pixels. Let's save that. Go back, and now when you click on different authors, you're going to see detailed information about them, and you'll see different descriptions, you'll see different dates, and you'll see the names of the authors as well as the portraits. Now the one thing though is if you go to writers, as you can see here, we don't display anything, and what I would actually like to do is I'd like to create another route just before the other one. So let's create a route, and this will match the URL itself, so without anything else. And it will basically render a simple message where we might say, let's provide a callback function. We might say something like let's do h1, please select a writer from above, something like that. Let's say that. And in fact, let's maybe do h3 instead of h1. Let's say that. So now the problem, of course, is if you click on the writer, you're going to see that same message at the top, and we already came across that use case. The only thing you need to do is to add the exact property to the route like that. Let me also indent a few things here so that it's readable. Okay, let me save that. And now if you go to writers, you're going to see the message, please select a writer from above. And then once you do click on one of the names from the list, you're actually going to see the details about the writer. And then of course the message is not going to be displayed because we are not matching it. The router would not be matching it at that point. Now you go back to home, now you see the home, you click on writers, yeah, we get the writers, and then you can basically navigate between them. Now the next thing I would like to do is, like I mentioned, we have the store object here. And then what I'd like to do is I'd like to add a new property to all of the writers, and that will be the books, the list of books. What this will allow us to do is it allow us to display a list of the books for each of the writers, and then we'll be able to click on the books and also see the related information about those books. And this would be a great opportunity to work with nested routes in React Router. So I hope you liked the video, and I'll see you next time.